Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. We're back again with you guys for another show. Eventually after what has been a tough couple of days, it's fair to say, Arsenal losing 4-1 in the Europa League final against Chelsea. FYI, there is going to be a proper review show for the channel basically on Sunday. I'm going to be joined by a couple of people to talk about what happened. But I thought it was important to give my sort of reaction, my opinion, my views on what was a really, really difficult day for the club being a fan. And I wanted to sort of give you some insight into the day of what happened for me and some of the other guys watching it, and also just reaction of obviously the game and what comes next in terms of transfers, decision making, money and all that. I want to cover that all. But so we start off obviously what I did. So the plan was we're going to, like many fans you might have seen on Twitter, for the people that live in obviously in the London area, there's lots of events on. Tollington put something on, there was lots of other places on, but we went to Club Aquarium, which is a club in Shoreditch, is what's described as on Google Maps or whatever you want to call it. Sure doesn't feel like Shoreditch. But we met up with some really good friends of ours, such as Tom and Lee Judges and Claude, people that you know very, very well. And it was a great atmosphere, really, really buzzing, confident, buoyant, and in a way in which we thought that we'd come out of this with the result against Valencia. We thought we saw a performance which was very much the same. We left, which was Liverpool Street Station, where we're in the Wetherspoons there, having a drink beforehand, and walked over to Club Aquarium. Lots of songs being sung, people filming us on the way there because we were making so much noise. And when we arrived, it started raining. Now, I'm not too much of a believer in pathetic fallacy, but it turned out that was certainly something for the game moving ahead. And we went into the club to watch the game, very busy already, a lot of Arsenal fans in there, and it was still only about half full, but still very busy, so you can tell it was going to fill up by the time the match kicked off. And what happened next was really unfortunate when we all realised suddenly that, ignore the helicopter by the way above me, we all realised that what was going to happen is that the game was being streamed on YouTube. Obviously YouTube putting out a live link, I think via either the BT YouTube channel or the Europa League YouTube channel, I'm not quite sure. But they put out a live stream. Now, if you're a paying customer, right, you pay to go and watch one of these things, you'd think that it would be a live from the TV coming straight through. And we all know that if you watch something on a stream, be it via YouTube, via a completely legal manner to watch the game online or wherever, then you know that it's going to be slightly behind what the TV coverage was going to be. And this was the case. And not only that, but there was 3 screens in there. There was 2 small TVs from where we were looking at, and 1 huge, massive projectory type screen. Okay. Now, you wouldn't mind too much. You'd think, okay, well, it's a few seconds behind what the TV's shown. Everyone just put their phone on silent. They're not going to look at that. By the time you actually get something through, it would have happened on the big screen anyway. Not too big of a deal. Problem was that the screen in the front left-hand corner, which is only about, I mean, it was tiny. It was about 4 times the size of the phone I'm currently recording this video on, if I'm honest, was 6 seconds ahead of the massive screen in which we were watching the game on. Now, you can imagine if you've got 500, 600 people in one room watching a game, and there's a tiny little screen in the corner showing the game 6 seconds ahead of time, then all eyes are going to be on that. And I had judges next to me going, just don't watch it, don't look at it. And it's extremely difficult not to look at something where you know if there's a corner, if there's a set piece, if there's a penalty or whatever, you know you're going to look at that screen, because whilst everyone's still reacting to the big screen, because some of them might not be able to see the little one, that you're going to react to that and you're going to see that small screen, and you knew what's happening. And that really ruined the entire experience. In fact, if I'm being honest, when it hit 2-0, I walked out, got my headphones out, put the radio on, and then tried to find somewhere else on the way to watch it. A friend of mine actually went to an establishment next door. Let's say that you have to be a certain age to go in there, or put it that way. And he was sending me messages basically saying that they had it on the TVs next door, and 500 people have paid 10 quid to get into this place and can't even watch the game properly, live, without the distortment of other screens elsewhere being on a different time lapse. So that was the experience. I watched the entire match by the end of the game. I was fully up to date with what was going on, but I mean, I made the right choice, it seemed, walking out of that particular place at 2-0 before having to endure the rest of the game elsewhere. And the game was dire, let's be honest. The game was absolutely awful. And what's really annoying is that you have this sort of stigma about being an Arsenal fan where you expect certain things, but then when it actually comes to it, you sort of put those doubts aside and think, we actually might do this, we could do this, because there's signs. There's games against Valencia, games against Napoli, where you think maybe there's a chance we might put in those performances again, and we just didn't. And it was pathetic, and it was awful and rubbish, and for a cup final performance, the team should be absolutely killing themselves about it, because they should be absolutely down in the dumps and miserable like we are, and guilty for putting in that performance, because it's done. We are done as a club if we're going to perform in games of that calibre like that. It's not acceptable. It's about as acceptable as the performance that the establishment that we were in putting on the show for us. It was absolutely dreadful. And when you get through to this place in a European Cup final, when we've got what's going to happen on Saturday, which, I mean, I'm personally more nervous about that than I was going into the game on Wednesday evening, because of what the ramifications of that might be. Now, if you go into the game like we did, with the messages that were coming out for former players, the pictures of all the players and the coaching staff together, hyping ourselves up, clearly showing that we were ready for this, that we had little messages coming out from players like Santi Cazorla and Wojciech Szczesny, fans that had gone out there. The build-up showed that Arsenal were prepared, that we'd done everything. And to contrast that, we saw a Chelsea side in complete disarray, arguments between David Luiz and Higuain, Sarri storming off a training field. Apparently that boiled down to the fact that he thought it was a closed training pitch and he wanted us to work on certain things that he didn't want to be able to show the media that Arsenal could get hold of. Kante's fitness came into question about a week before the game, and he still played, whether that was mind games or not. Frankly, I don't care. It doesn't matter. We're supposed to focus on ourselves, not the opposition. And when it comes down to that, what actually occurred on the night was nearly unbelievably fake fiction. It didn't seem real of what the build-up was compared to what we were shown. It's like those adverts when you see a fast food chain advertise what their burgers look like, and then actually when you get it, it's this sort of molten mess of rubbish. That's exactly what we got. This build-up was huge, the tension was huge, and then when it came to the product, it was nothing like what we were expecting. But there's now an argument to say, can we really be surprised at this? We watched ourselves blow our chance to get top four, ruin any hopes of Champions League football for our league position because of stupidity and immaturity and naivety. And those games against Everton and Wolves and Leicester, even the Watford game which we scraped through, the signs were there. The game against Brighton at home, Crystal Palace, all these fixtures where all we had to get was 2 more points to overtake Tottenham in the end. I know you say if we'd have won that game, things might have been different, but maybe they wouldn't have. 2 points would have got us into that top 4, and we blew it. And whilst I 100% put that game in the Europa League final down to the performance of the players, the manager in the league fixtures, for me, takes a lot more percentage of the blame now than I originally did sort of divvy out to him. I thought it was still more on the players, but when you're going up against a team like Crystal Palace and you decide to risk that, in the hope that you're resting players that you think could get you the result so we can go to Wolves with a better side and gain even more points there. The way we blew the league really, really sort of encapsulated our form and made us completely capitulate in terms of our attitude and mentality going towards what was arguably then becoming the most important game of arguably the last decade. I mean, it was a ridiculous way to prepare ourselves. I don't think the gap between the final game of the season and that game helped. I'm not going to highlight and say we should have gone to America like Chelsea did, but clearly the preparations weren't good enough to really turn the heads of the players. And that sort of leads us on to where we are next, in that we're now in a situation where we've got such a huge job. We thought the job was going to be huge this summer anyway, let alone worrying about what the job has to be now with the restrictions that will come from not being in the Champions League. And that comes on to the next point. So many fans all throughout the season said we deserve to be in the Europa League. We're not at the level of the Champions League. We can't compete in it. What's the point in playing in this competition in which we can't get past the last 16? Well, I'm sorry, but when you're in a competition which is giving you the financial backing that gives you access to talking to players like Wilfried Zaha, like Diop Upamecano, like James Maddison, who's had a fantastic season. Now, because we're not there and we're not in that competition, we're now limited to the players that we can attract. Raul Senyeli and Vinay can come out and all they like and say, we're still a fantastic club. We've got the attractiveness to pull because we are Arsenal Football Club to get players in. I'm sorry, but it's just not the same. You do not attract the same quality of players without being in the Champions League. It's the bottom line is there. And because of that, because of our own naivety and fragility, we've now cost ourselves arguably a better chance of taking advantage of some of the faults and the issues that our competitors are going to have next season. Chelsea have got a transfer ban. They're likely going to lose their best player in Hazard. Take Hazard out of that team, Chelsea still have arguably a better side than we do. Okay? We could have signed players by being in the Champions League to maybe overtake them in terms of quality for next season. That now looks unlikely. Tottenham Hotspur in a Champions League final that if they win means they could possibly attract an even higher calibre of player than even just being in the Champions League itself. Even if they don't, they're in a situation where they're still paying back a stadium that's cost them a lot of money. There still might be restrictions on who they could sign, which is a positive. But again, not being in the Champions League means we now can't compete on the same level of getting certain players as they can. Manchester United are always going to be a team that are able to spend money no matter what, because we like to fool ourselves and think that Arsenal is this magical promised land that it used to be. It's not. Those days are done. Manchester United, however, because of the prestige they have, because of the money they have and the wages that they can outlay on certain players, will still have that pull. We'll still have that promise. Because if you're a player looking on the outside, you really have to put any sort of thoughts about being a fan aside here. If you're looking as a player, as a complete neutral with no interest as a fan in either Manchester United or Arsenal, you know that as a club, Manchester United are certainly in a better position than Arsenal are to get back into that Champions League, and you're more likely as a player to get back into Champions League football playing for Manchester United than you are at Arsenal. It's as simple as that. So moving forward then, I mean, Liverpool and City, you can forget about comparing ourselves to them because they're so far and away better than we are, it's a joke. It does bring me on to a slight segue of talking about our comparisons to Liverpool and where people have now, and onto the sort of social media reactions of things, of people saying we should be getting rid of Emery at this moment. I still don't think we should be getting rid of Emery at this time. I think it's extremely shotgun ready, shall we say, to want to get rid of him immediately. And want to get rid of a guy who at the start of the season, we said, whilst the aim is always to get into Champions League, we said this was a one-off. This was a freebie. This was a free shot at trying to transition between the old regime and the new one. Whether the new one is any different to the old one, I'm yet to see some evidence based on what we've seen so far that it is. But at the moment, we can't see that happening. I do allow him to have one more season, and it has to be one more. We cannot, as a club, fall into the trap of sticking with a manager if they don't achieve their objectives. We did that for too long with Arsene Wenger, and we cannot fall into the trap of doing that again with Unai Emery. If he doesn't achieve top four next season after making a certain amount of signings, then he has to be moved on. He has to be moved on, and we bring someone in with a different dynamic, because whilst it was very clear that we signed Unai Emery as a man that looked like being in the Europa League would be great for him because he's got fantastic experience, in terms of league and changing the dynamic and the mentality of the club, he hasn't been able to do that. We saw signs at the start of the season, but throughout a 38 games plus our cup competitions, it's shown that it's not done enough to be able to do it. Training sessions have changed. The assistant manager, in terms of their direction, has changed. The outlay on the pitch, being more mobile, being more agitated on the touchline, like so many wanted. Oh, Wenger just sits there. He does nothing. We need someone who comes in and shouts and screams for 90 minutes. We've got that. And it's not done anywhere near as much as people thought it would. So one more season under Emery, he has to achieve. He has to win a position in that top four, or win the Europa League next season to guarantee us Champions League football for next season, or it's done. The project in terms of Unai Emery is over and it needs to be changed and someone else needs to be brought in. You're at a really unfortunate point, Arsenal, where you've decided to bring someone in this season and the following summer, if you're not ruthless and you want to carry on with Unai Emery, the likes of Max Allegri becomes available. These managers at clubs like Barcelona, Real Madrid have lost managers this season, and the likes of Barcelona, Bayern Munich, moving on managers, it seems, even though they've won the league. That's the type of ruthless nature that we need to have moving forwards if we want to succeed. No longer privy and accepting of what's going on, whether we don't achieve completely all our goals. It needs to be our goals or nothing. And if we don't do that, there needs to be consequences. And that's why the comments of Unai Emery the other day, for me, were really frustrating. When you see someone like Unai Emery come out and say, I used to win games with the fear of being sacked, whereas now coming to Arsenal it's completely different. Now he wins games with a look to the future. Whilst I get the sentiment and I understand that's great that we're signed to win games in order to push ourselves forward, you should always want to win games and feel like you are under pressure to push yourselves to be the best. And the reason why we don't have fantastic players playing their guts out every single week is because of a lack of pressure. It's because there's not enough competition for places in all these positions. And because of that, players get comfortable and players get, unfortunately, vulnerable to these performances that we saw at the weekend. And the signatures that we make are still problematic. We signed Stefan Lichtsteiner to be back up to Bellerin, and in a Europa League final, we're playing a teenager that's out of his natural position. Don't get me wrong, I think he's done well this season in some of his performances. But if it comes down to you spent a good amount of money on wages, bringing in one of Juventus' best right-backs of previous seasons, thinking that he's going to do a job without doing enough of your homework to realise maybe the guy's past it, that you then have to go and play one of England's under-20s, under-21 players at right-back when he's clearly not a right-back, he's a midfielder, then that's a huge problem. Not having enough competition and quality for places in the team has cost us massively this season. Having to bring in the likes of Guendouzi, done well, definitely trailed off towards the season, and El Neni in midfield against the Crystal Palace side that were safe, didn't have too much to play for, and instead we're having their players like Townsend and Zaha putting themselves into the limelight, looking for moves, and were able to do that by smashing us at the Emirates. We should have been beating those comfortably and playing teams and playing players that are good enough to get into the Arsenal side that should be winning trophies, titles going forward. But we're not at that stage. But even if we're not at that stage of looking to win a title, we need to be bringing in players with the view that we will get there someday. Not playing players like El Neni, not keeping players like Mustafi, not keeping players longer than we should do like Mesut Ozil. I'm not saying those are the guys and they're the reasons we lost that final. It's for me a group collective reason. It's a group mentality. It's a club mentality which is wrong to the core and infected with just complacency and comfortability. And because of that, we've now failed. And I can't see it turning around next season. And therefore, as I've said, we'll expect Unai Emery to be moved on. Whether he is or not down to me, down to the club. Do I trust the club to make that decision? No, I don't trust the clubs to make that decision. I hope they do make the right decision, all saying the right thing when it matters, like Raul Senio and Vinay coming out, like me and Mike and Drew discussed the other day. But when it comes to actually push comes to shove, are they going to do it? Are they going to make the right decisions? I hope they will, but I still have huge doubts. And I'm not confident in the slightest. Moving on to sort of where do we go next then, sort of this summer. I've got a couple of ideas for videos that I want to do about the summer to do with transfers. Obviously, transfers is so diluted in the amount of content that you get with daily videos and everything. But I've got a couple of ideas for transfers. But I've already mentioned that we're going to be out of the race for certain players. We need to be really savvy and street smart about the players that we bring in. We need to fill this director of football or whatever technical director role that's going around. We need that filled soon. And with Edu being the most likely candidate who can't come in until after the competitions in Brazil have finished, that's another worry. That's a possibility that we see another summer wasted, where we really needed to get behind the team to rebuild it and back it. And then obviously there's the social media around why doesn't Stan Kroenke come in and invest loads of money, but he simply can't. We've looked at this, we know about FFP, and I know that the instant reaction to go is look at Manchester City and how much they're spending. Look at their revenue. Look at the revenue of these clubs being in the Champions League and the deals they have to bring in the money. If you can make money, you can spend it. And at the moment, the way Arsenal spend their money is a joke. Is an absolute farce, the way we've completely broken our wage structure. We've completely broken in terms of deals that we've done commercially, losing Ivan Gazidis and then allowing him to move to Milan and take key figures from the club like Shab Forsyth, who's apparently moving to Milan at the moment. It's how we've allowed this to occur and how people who are up in the board, who are supposed to be experts and earning 6-figure salaries plus 7-figure salaries every single year, and have able to allow this mess to ensue in one of the world's biggest football clubs is maddening. It's absolute madness. So moving forward, what do we expect? What do we want to happen? We want good signings. We want good movement of players out of the door. Players like Mustafi need to be moved on. Jenkinson needs to be moved on. We need to be moving on players, either Monreal or Kolasinac, because we need a better left back. I'd rather keep one of them for competition, but we need to move one of them on. I know Matt Nacho is out of contract, so that's the easy one, but maybe sign him onto a contract, sell Kolasinac, get some revenue in. In terms of the midfield, Mohamed El Neni has to go. Granit Xhaka, whilst I love the guy and trust me, I've backed him to the hill. If we can find an upgrade, get an upgrade. In terms of our wide positions, we've got Reece Nelson coming back. Is it necessary that we keep someone like Iwobi at the club? It's here and there. I mean, if we sign a better player, fantastic. And then the striking position. Now, this is... For me, the reason we lost against Chelsea is because they were so brilliant at isolating our two strikers and limiting us to the amount of chances that we could create and how we can access those two. Shows that playing two up top does not work. They might be best mates, they might be lovers, I don't care. But we need to get rid of one of them for a very, very good fee and play with a one-striker system with two clear wingers who know their jobs, with a solid midfield behind it, with a defensive midfield pivot base if we're going to do anything moving forward. Because playing with two strikers, with an attacking midfielder like Ozil in behind, is so fruitless that you're not going to see any success moving forwards. We've seen that there's been interest from the likes of Barcelona, and if we're going to move forward, we have to bring in someone who's going to be good backup, because we know that none of them are going to play. There's no point having the likes of Lacazette and Aubameyang there when you've got two people that want to be starting and eventually are going to be sitting on the bench wasting a lot of money. We either move one of them on, bring in a very young striker or low 20s that's got a lot of promise. I mean, you look at what Man City did. They knew Aguero was getting older. They bring in the likes of Gabriel Jesus. They're interested in bringing in João Felix, who's another attacking player. I know he's not an out-and-out striker, but it's that constant trying to improve and upgrade on what you haven't been prepared for when players need to move on. Having both Lacazette and Aubameyang at the club, whilst we saw in the game against Valencia, can be great across a season. We know that the system of playing two up top does not work. Are they going to be willing to play in wide positions? I don't know. It's probably a waste of a player. So why not go out and get a lot of money for one of them? Aubameyang is touching the 30 now. And maybe if we can get a good 50, 60 million for him and reinvest that in areas of the pitch where we need someone to come in and be brilliant, it has to be done. We need to be ruthless. We can't think about being all nice and emotional towards players anymore. It's not going to work. It really isn't. So to sort of conclude all this, really poor final. Really not confident at all moving forwards in terms of the way the club looks on the outlook. Transfers are now going to be limited. Some people got their wish of us playing in the Europa League. Moronic, however it is. I mean, if you want to be in the Europa League, great. But personally, I've got a lot of bigger plans that I want for my club, and I think we deserve to be in the Champions League and need it for the type of players that should be playing for Arsenal. And they now have their derogative to turn Arsenal down because they haven't got Champions League football. So is what it is. At the end of the day, we're in the Europa League next season and we need to rebuild this team. We need to get rid of key players that are issues. If that happens, great. If we can sign some great players, even better. But there's a lot of turmoil at the moment, and we're going to have to see what happens moving forward. As I said at the start of the show, Sunday evening, hopefully we're going to get a shout out to you boys and girls with obviously some of the panellists that you've seen throughout the season, and they can get their thoughts on what happened and where they see the club moving forwards. But I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of a breakdown from myself, and moving forwards, hope to give you some more solo content with you guys, with the channel sort of evolving and changing a little bit into next season. So let's hope and pray that we see a summer in which a lot of change happens. Change in Arsenal. We thought it happens. Hasn't happened as much as we think it did. But yeah, we'll see you again very, very soon. As always, up the Arsenal.